Hello Advanced Higher Historians, and welcome to the next lesson in our Stalin section of the topic. This one in particular is focusing on Stalin and the cult of personality, which we have mentioned briefly in the past couple of lessons, but now looking at it in a little bit more detail. In particular, what we want to do is explore how Stalin developed the cult of personality and the impact that obviously had. Reading assignment for this lesson is pages 276 to 284 in the textbook, and this one is going to be quite textbook focused, with a lot of the work that you're going to do for this lesson coming from the book to consolidate your information. So make sure you've got a copy of the textbook and continue the lesson. So, in terms of the creation and development of the Stalinist state, we know that the origins of control came from Lenin, with the development going through Stalin. So for example, we have the purges, how they changed from being kind of just purging the party and throwing people out of the party to becoming more violent. And then after Kirov's assassination, we have the show trials and the end of the purges. When we're looking at this as an evaluation, quite a significant number of people being killed, executed, put into the gulags and things like that. Thinking about the instruments of control, we've got the terror, we've got the secret police, and the gulags and things being used, and then we also have the cult of the leader and the cultural revolution. So the role of the women and the family, education, religion, youth movements, artists, things like that, all kind of leading into this cultural shift, which sees Stalin being very much at the heart of everything that is happening going forward. So this is kind of where the control of the Stalinist state starts to develop. Remember, I said it was a two-pronged approach. We have the terror on one side and then the propaganda and the cult of personality on the other. So Stalin's sort of imposed position as saviour of Russia seemed to be something that dominated the Soviet Union. His image was literally everywhere. He was this kind of omnipotent leader who the people should love and revere, and there was no escaping from him. He was on books, he was in sort of chocolate bars with had picture cards with them, cigarettes, the same thing. He was on walls, there was paintings of him, there was statues of him, literally he was everywhere. And the cult itself was not just about the personal kind of adulation of Stalin as a person, but as him as a leader. So it wasn't just about him, it was kind of this development from the cult of personality that had Lenin at its forefront into Stalin. It's about whoever this leader is becoming almost kind of godlike. Now, if you think back to prior to the October and the February revolutions, and even 1905, you can kind of see how the Russian people had that mentality for the Tsars of old for a very long time. The father of Russia, the little god sort of element that they had been taught to see the Tsar as, tends not to have gone away, at least by the look of this. It's just been changed, and this is one of the reasons that some historians have referred to Stalin as the Red Tsar, is it that he just kind of adopted this persona. It was also basically a development as a response to the rapid period of change within the Soviet Union as well, because there was so much going on economically but also culturally, which we will come back to, that many of the Russian people were quite bewildered, quite confused about what was happening to them, and they were kind of looking for something that felt safe and felt normal, something that they kind of they knew. They didn't have to go away and try to get their head around it. It was just perfectly normal everyday situation. And Stalin becomes that kind of rock in the middle of this very confused storm for these people. The cult of Stalin really provided an image of purpose, of solidarity. It gave the people confidence and faith that there was someone that could lead them out of the troubles that they had experienced, let's face it, quite significantly for a while, into a good society where they could all just rest, relax, and pretty much live their lives in peace. And there are various ways that Stalin actually worked to create this totalitarian state and to create this kind of dominant leadership position. Tool number one for him was propaganda, and you can see an example of the propaganda that was used here, where you've got these very happy Soviet youths putting up his very magnificent looking portrait. It's, working kind of family, hanging the photo of Stalin they obviously look very happy, they look like they're in awe of him, the man of steel, in this very dominant position. And he used photos like this to portray the message that not only was he kind of the central point to all families' lives, that they have these kind of images of him, but actually the people of the USSR were happy, they adored him, and every family obviously had a very large painting of Stalin on their walls, because, you know, who wouldn't? But that was not actually always the case. We obviously know that there was a lot of people that didn't quite like what Stalin was doing. They were frightened to talk out against him, but they don't really seem like they would quite happily be having photos of him decorating their halls or their front rooms. However, the propaganda tool was the thing that helped him keep control and to consolidate this control by making out that he was literally everywhere, and that if you didn't have a painting of Stalin in your home, then very clearly you were not in support of this, and you might find yourself getting a wee knock from the NKVD in the middle of the night. Second tool, obviously, that Stalin uses in order to try and keep control over the USSR is the control of the media. Now, during his reign of terror, as we put it, the media is completely under his full control, which not only enables him to use tool 1, propaganda, but it also lets him alter the opinions of the people in the USSR of him, of his policies, pretty much of anything that he wants to alter, because he's the one that is in control of what messages the media is putting out. There is not a media outlet anywhere within the USSR at this point in time that is not based on Stalin's control, so he has the final say on every article that they are publishing. He overstated stories of his acts throughout the kind of 1917 period up to and including the October Revolution, which becomes known as a historiography field known as revisionist Stalinism. So if you're looking at any revisionist Stalinism elements, you'll find that he tends to be given more of a big role during the October Revolution than he actually really had. He also used the media to create nicknames and titles for himself. For example, he starts to become known in some circles as the Father of Nations, the Brilliant Genius of Humanity, the Gardener of Human Happiness, you know, fairly low-key titles that he is using for himself to try and encourage people to come along with him. Also, using the media, Stalin was able to more or less rewrite the history of the Bolshevik Party and the October Revolution to portray a more important role of involvement for himself at the expenses of people like Leon Trotsky, for example, and all other old Bolsheviks who Stalin, as we know from the purges, was frightened that they could expose the truth about him, especially the ones that had been near when the deathbed testament had been seen and discussed. He made out that he was more in a position of power over them. Okay, tool 3, hopefully this time without dogs growling in the background, is Stalinism as a way of life. Generally, when we think about Stalinism, we use it as a broad umbrella term to talk about anything to do with Stalin. But actually, it is a style of government rather than just an ideology. Because Stalin was one of the first people in Europe at this point in time to introduce economic quotas throughout this area and throughout the USSR, he pretty much encouraged an ideology where companies were having to compete against one another. And then obviously rewards are being introduced to workers who exceed their quotas, there's bonuses and things available for them. So Stalinism became this kind of way of controlling the government and style of government where quotas and rewards were the normal everyday situation for the people of Russia and the workers in particular. Tool 4 is the use of fear and terror. Now, we've obviously seen things like the collectivization, we've used the secret police, the NKVD, as a way to make civilians disappear who are some way in a threat to Stalin or his political ideals. And a lot of people are now avoiding the crime and punishment kind of element of things because it was too severe for them to actually commit any sort of crimes or any sort of slights against Stalin or the party, because it was either death or the gulags is what they had to look forward to. So this element of fear is one of the main ways he does manage to keep control. Just Just a quick point about the gulags, because we have mentioned them a few times. They're the giant labour camps, mostly set up in Siberia but across the USSR, and prisoners were forced to work as slave labour, quite often in temperatures that would reach below 40 degrees centigrade, living in cramped, very overcrowded sort of sheds that didn't offer very much protection at all, and the food and things that they did receive tended to be quite rotten meats or vegetables, and definitely not enough calories for the number of calories they were burning with the labour intensive work they were doing. They would be mining, they would be doing kind of all the hard work that ultimately led to things being available for the economic situation back in Russia. So this could be minerals and materials that they needed for the industries, or that Stalin needed to sell abroad to make money to modernise the industries back in the urban areas of the USSR. There is a film bit on this that you can click on the PowerPoint itself, that you can kind of see the gulags and see kind of what's happening with that. So you might want to pause this video and go and have a look at that, or come back and have a look at that once you are done. Tool 5 for Stalin is achieving absolute power. In order for Stalin to have ultimate control over the USSR, he had to ensure he had no threats that would potentially stop him achieving his goals. And this is where we have the show trials, and we have the purges that are obviously there to eliminate the old Bolsheviks, change people's opinions on these long-serving men through the use of propaganda, and then they use the show trials as the excuse to annihilate them and take them out. Tool 6, as we've mentioned, is the cult of personality itself. It more or less was the final kind of wash of control that Stalin was able to give the USSR and his political situation, to give him absolute power over the country. He was able to do whatever he thought was right because there was literally no one available to stop him. More or less what Stalin became was a godlike position of power throughout the country he was in charge of. And this not only cements his place as a dictator and his dictatorship, but it makes him into an ultimate leader, and places quite a number of levels of restraint and fear into the people that might potentially oppose him. So in terms of the cult of the leader, we're thinking about what Stalin's initial image might have actually been. He comes across as this kind of humble, modest, working man of the people. He was a working class peasant background who had grown through the ranks of the party and had become the ultimate leader of Russia. He gained his initial post on the General Committee in 1912 due to the fact he had this working class background, which is, remember, what the whole revolution actually stood for. In 1919, he was made head of the Workers' and Peasants' Inspectorate. He's described as the grey blur by Surkov. There's quite a lot of discussion about this idea of him being a grey blur, in that he was always kind of there in the background, which is one of the reasons why when we talk about the power struggle, Trotsky tends to overlook him. Stalin's emphasis was also about socialism in one country rather than permanent revolution, kind of meaning that he was more likely to be focused on establishing Russia into the best country it could be, rather than plunging the country into a state of continual war, which is obviously what Trotsky would have potentially done had he come to power instead. And this furthers his image of him becoming this great Russian patriot, a man of the people, because he is representing what the people wanted. And if you are a very war-weary, tired people, you are not likely to want to go to continual war with other countries if your country is falling apart. So the fact that he was able to establish himself as this, I'm going to fix our country and make it the best it possibly can be type of person, gives his initial image a very nice shine and polish to it that makes the people want to actually believe him and want to follow him, even though some of the things he was doing was questionable or did result in quite high death numbers. So the cult really gets underway between 1929 to 1933. Late 1920s onwards, after he became the new party leader, he promoted himself as the new Stalin, remember, the disciple of Lenin, the new Lenin as it were. he is the Lenin of today. He is basically the reincarnation of the great leader that the people are grieving for. We even have places in Russia being renamed in his honour, which is why we have Stalingrad. By 1929, it's really clear that the people of Russia, at least on the surface, are very much in support of him, because there's rather lavish celebrations for his 50th birthday. Applause every time that Stalin stands up to give a speech starts to grow longer, to the point where quite often he would actually have to start his speech 2 or 3 minutes later, because he just would smile and wave until the people calmed down. By 1931, you've got these huge portraits of Marx, Engels, the people responsible for the Communist Manifesto, along with Lenin, the driver of it, and now Stalin, the person who's continuing it, appearing at all these special occasions, holidays and things like that, all over Russia. Portraits as well everywhere else, stressing Stalin's humanity, the fact that he's an ordinary working class man, he's involved in the lives of the ordinary people, and a lot of portraits of him with children, because he was seen as Uncle Joe. That is what they referred to him as. He was a children's person, he liked to spend time with the kids and the children, and he was a man that was approachable as a result of this. Now, these two images are very much in contrast with one another. You've got the Uncle Joe, who is very approachable, everyone loves, the working class man, and then on the other side you've got the man who spent 5 hours a day signing death warrants during the show trials. It seems almost impossible that this man is one and the same, but the cult was responsible for taking the images that were maybe less savoury of Stalin and creating them into a more positive spin, which is why the cult is so important to his position as ultimate leader. Between 1933 then and 1939, his image starts to be used to provide a sense of strong leadership. So throughout the first sort of set of 5-year plans, the chaos of the purges, he goes from being this kind of working class man of the people to being this strong leader, with the people gathered around him in his pictures and his paintings, looking at him as a kind of teacher in some ways. He is sort of taking a firm hand, driving them through the chaos as a trusted, firm-handed leader would supposed to do. Poetry at the time, music, plays, all these things were performed in his honour, creating this idea that this is what he was doing. And we enter into a period of what we call socialist realism. Basically, it's a term that is used to celebrate the achievements of the proletariat and their struggle to build a great Soviet Union, with Stalin being the kind of cornerstone of this. In 1938, an official history of the Communist Party book was written that took away some of the roles from the other leading Bolsheviks and emphasised Stalin's role in the revolution, also playing down the roles of things like Trotsky, Bukharin and others, and this became the definitive history of the Communist Party, and it also resulted in amendments being made to photographs and to other sources of information at this point in time. So this is where we see the examples of images of Stalin and Lenin together, which never existed, appearing, images of Stalin with groups of people being doctored so that it was Stalin on his own in situations, pictures of the actual revolution itself, or periods during war communism where Stalin would be inserted into pictures to make it look like he had more of a role than he actually did. A year later, in 1939, an exhibition is then held called Stalin and the Soviet People, and this again gives back the image of Stalin as this leader, this teacher, all of these people from areas all over the USSR in adulation of Stalin, and these images continue to build up as the war starts to approach and the threat of Germany on the horizon. You start to see images of Stalin in his military kind of uniform more common, and a lot more emphasis put on his role during the revolution and the Civil War period, as the war seems to be looming on the horizon. They are creating this image of Stalin as this generalissimo, this general of the people, this leader of the people who will be important for them when they inevitably go to war. From 1939 onwards, you've got the height of the cult, where literally Stalin's image is everywhere. He has now 100% cemented this idea of him being the sole heir of Lenin. He is kind of the infallible interpreter of party ideology, so what his word is what everything should be. His word is law, basically. At this point in time, his childhood home was turned into a shrine. People would actually pay to come and tour it. Portraits start to show him in more increasingly kind of godlike positions, or in solitude, where he seems to be contemplating the best way forward for the country. It becomes less about the man of the people and more about the superior, distant, almost monumental, all-powerful being that is not looking down on the people but is definitely above them and in a protector-like role. His 70th birthday rolls round and the celebrations are utterly immense. Giant portraits of him are illuminated above Moscow. The festivities actually continue going until his 71st birthday, which is one heck of a party, so you have to admit that's definitely showing the height of the cult at this point in time. We obviously then have that sort of slightly less important issue of the Second World War, where Stalin, once he gets his act together, actually manages to push the Nazi party back, and this only enhances the ideals from the cult and promotes that even further. Stalin's image goes from being the kind of equal, almost, or the disciple of Lenin, to definitely being his peer and his equal, almost in some respects to being the master. He becomes much more than Lenin ever actually was by this point, where the Nazi party have been driven and the Nazi forces have been driven out of Russia, with Stalin in hot pursuit of them, which we will come back to when we discuss the Great Patriotic War in a little bit more detail. So, in terms of sources from the time, all of them really important to kind of help understand the cult of personality and how Stalin was using it to cement himself as party leader. Page 276 to 277 of Corn and Fine have some really good sources for you to have a look at. So what I'd like you to do is to look at sources 15.1 to 15.6 and think about what the message in each one actually is. What is it designed to convey to the Russian people? Then you should read 15.7 and think about what image of the Soviet state this ode is supposed to create. Think about what the religious overtones of it are in particular and how this relates to what we've just talked about with the cult of personality. And then read source 15.8 and think about, does the evidence in this source prove that Stalin did genuinely attract what was actual real adulation or not? So pause the video, go to the textbook and do these tasks, and then come back for the next part of the lesson. So now that we have an idea of what the cult of personality is, we want to consolidate our understanding of how the cult actually developed. On page 276 there is an activity box. You should use the information on pages 276 to 279, including diagram 15A, and complete the activity box as well as the focus route task on page 278. So pause the video there, do the tasks, and then come back to the next part. So what you should do here is use page 282 to take just a couple of bullet points on the interpretations of the cult of personality from these sort of three areas. So put these as a heading and just a couple of points based on what they're saying about Stalin as a benefactor, as defender of the people, or as this charismatic leader. In terms of the minority, the intellectuals, the experienced party members, some of the workers genuinely actually did find the cult to be a bit absurd. There was active criticism quite early on. There was a genuine feeling that Lenin wouldn't have acted like this and he wouldn't have actually liked the level of attention this personality cult was giving him. His focus was more about the revolution, and as his disciple, Stalin should be the same. There was criticisms that it was turning into a personal dictatorship, and a lot of criticism then lessened as the purges got underway, as you can imagine, because you didn't want to be purged. There was evidence that the excessive propaganda that was being produced was actually counterproductive at this point in time, and rather than actually cementing his ideals and his position, it actually did help to create more criticism of Stalin than he maybe would have wanted. Even the critics had a kind of level of grudging respect or admiration for him in some respects, especially after the Great Patriotic War period. He was considered to be a great leader as far as the Russian tradition had gone. He was tough and he was quite hard, but he had genuinely made Russia into a world power. When he died, there was quite possibly a genuine level of relief, but a very genuine grief for the fact that they had lost him as a leader. The cult popularised Stalin, and it brought solidarity, it brought a level of solidity and confidence and coherence to society, which had been going through a period of change literally from Nicholas's abdication up to this point. It was something that they desperately needed, and it's something that they clinged to, even if they didn't actually agree to everything that was actually going on and everything that he stood for. So you're going to read section C and complete the focus route on page 282, and complete the activity box on 284 as well, just to consolidate how the Russian people reacted to the cult. Obviously, another thing that we've kind of talked about is this idea of rewriting history. Quite a significant aspect of the cult of personality was this reinterpretation of history in Stalin's favour, about him having this more important role and things like that, and also diminishing the old Bolsheviks who were being classed as enemies of the people. And if you have a look at section B in the textbook, page 280 to 281, it gives you just a little bit more information about how he did this, and you can see some of the images that were changed. So ultimately, why do we think that Stalin found it necessary to rewrite the history of the revolution and the development of the Soviet state in the short course? So part of your assignment this week is I want you to think about this question, and I want you to write just a short answer. You can post it just as a message in the team if you like, or you can upload it if you would rather, about why you think Stalin thought it was necessary to rewrite history of the revolution and the development of the Soviet state to that point. Why was that necessary for him to do? And it's your opinion. It doesn't have to be very long. If you want to find some historiography to back up what you're saying, then you can do that, but just give a general overview of what your thoughts are on this. So, in summary, in the cult of the personality, Stalin was presented as a godlike figure, omniscient and omnipresent. The cult was at its height at the end of the 1930s, and images of Stalin on posters and paintings, in books, as statues were everywhere in the Soviet Union. Stalin enjoyed this adulation and encouraged the view of himself as this great hero of the past, and he had history rewritten to reflect this view. The cult also served an important purpose. It gave the Russian people a sense of confidence in troubled times, and it told them that Stalin would see them through to a better society, which was really important for them at this point. So that's it for this lesson. For this, obviously, complete the tasks and upload your opinion, and complete any other assignment tasks for this week. If you have any questions or things you're not sure about, make sure you ask in the team or email and let me know.